David, I'm looking forward to having you on the show, man. And we were already chatting. I'm really pumped for this conversation.
Ryan, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited for what we're going to cover in the next hour.
Yeah, so I was, we were talking about your background, and you came from an entrepreneur family. You have gone through, some academic background to formalize probably a lot of the pain that your family's been through the sweat and grit, and have sold a business and are involved in a lot of businesses. So for the listeners that are not familiar with what you're doing, just kind of give us the 30,000 overview of the business that you sold and your background. Then we'll come back and we'll unpack the whole journey.
Sure. I mean, if you're watching this, you clearly know I'm devilishly handsome. I did my undergrad at the University of Michigan Business School, and then my JD MBA in the University of Miami. I don't like to publicize the JD part because I like to say that if you're going to think I'm an asshole, I should earn it, not just because I told you I was an attorney.
Oh my God.
I'm coming up with jokes right off the bat.
It's a good day.
But I think from an entrepreneurship perspective, as you alluded to, I think I've probably learned the most from being around my father, my uncles, and sort of the environment that I'm in. My dad started a chain of stores called Perfumania. There are fragrance stores all over the country, usually found in malls. Malls are those things that people used to go to where there's a lot of stores.
You are in a mall. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know who's in the audience. They might have only experienced buying things online. So especially more so because of the pandemic. Anyway, I grew up around people that were having a tremendous amount of success, employing a tremendous amount of people. And really having to be stewards, not just of their families, but of many families in these scenarios. And that kind of exposure was something that for myself, and I would say certainly for my siblings and I, it really imprinted on us, because in my dad's household, there's 4.5 siblings. But the
curious
core
on the half a person here, and
well, no, my
just
dad's daughter, didn't grow up with us. I shouldn't have said that. It should be 5. But entrepreneurship is pervasive, in my father's household, and I think I attributed a lot to just being around those environments, and I think that's a better learning ground and breeding ground than anything you could ever learn. I don't care if you're in the best schools like Michigan Business School or otherwise. So I did that. And then the core of what I've done, where the reason why we're on this interview is because I made a little product here called Dream Water. It's a shot that helps you relax and fall asleep. I'm sure we're going to use that story to go through this journey or what have you. But it's basically just the opposite of 5-hour energy. It's 0 calories. It's natural. And it just helps you, relax and fall asleep. I've come up with multiple iterations. We've sold it to every major food, drug, mass retailer in, I would say, North America, not just in the US, and in other territories around the world. We had a pretty robust Amazon business, D2C business as well. Anyway, so I'm sure we're going to cover that on the story, but that's at the highest level who I am and a little bit about my background.
Well, and for the listeners, what David and I were talking about is most likely segmenting this into 2 parts so we can talk about business growing value, how you scaled the business. And then on part 2, I think we're going to get a little bit more into the exit, but I think we might touch on a couple of those, but just kind of laying some of the groundwork. And why I think that's a good approach is because, David, you and I were talking on just right before we hit record of this thing that I see a lot of business owners shifting their mindset of like, hey, instead of solving for annual income, I want to grow a valuable business, create a bunch of choices. And we're kind of talking about whether you choose to be an entrepreneur or you have the academic first and then you became the entrepreneur. Because that's what I originally said to you. I was like, hey, like, you got your JD, you worked in investment banking for a while. So you must have had some foresight to, hey, I want to grow value, create this company, launch it. And I'm going to let you explain your response because I thought it was fantastic. And by the way, it's okay if we say any 4-letter words, but I think it was super interesting. And I think that's going to set the tone for the conversation.
My parents hate when I use the 4-letter words, but it's just a part of the vernacular, right? It's just how we talk in today's day and age. I've thought about this a lot experientially and then intellectually around, sometimes people say like, well, you learned entrepreneurship, you were taught entrepreneurship. And I'm like, I don't know that that's how that works. I think you either are or aren't an entrepreneur. Not that it's either good or bad, right? I don't want to create a distinction that is good or bad, but in my sort of perspective, we have everybody has good ideas. I mean, how many times have you been, out to dinner with some friends or hanging out and having some drinks, whatever, and people throw out great ideas
all the time.
But it takes a really fucked up, what I call the fucked up entrepreneurial gene, for somebody to say, I like that so much, I'm going to go do it. and I say it's fucked up because we don't really know what we're signing up for. And even if you're a serial entrepreneur, every journey is different. Every experience that you have is different. So when you say yes to saying, like, let me create something, like there had never been a water that helps you relax and fall asleep ever. I've never seen that before. So how crazy is it to say, like, let's go do that. Let's go put that in the market. Let's see what we have and all of that. But to me, that's part of the fun part of the journey. And I think that as a segue, it can kind of address the other area of the topic, which is, what is the purpose of building a business, right? I mean, effectively, if I can reframe your words, 100%, right? Like,
yeah.
Are we doing it for wealth creation? Are we doing it for, what are our motivations? Yeah, I mean, that was kind of what you were alluding to.
Yep, 100% wealth. Yeah, like what we've boiled it down to, and through growing through a bunch of our own strategic planning, is like, really, as entrepreneurs, we have three things. We want to create wealth, enjoy what we're doing, and make an impact. I mean, really, it all boils down to one of those things. And if one of them is missing, because you could be making a great impact and, having a lot of fun, and making no money, and you're going to go, well, I got to change the situation. Or making a bunch of money and having a lot of fun, but you're not making an impact, at some point you're going to go, what's this all for? So I think that it really boils down to one of those three things and how they all interact.
I like that a lot. I think though that for everybody's sort of own individual entrepreneurial journey, there's external factors that impact that sort of, let's call it, three-pronged analysis, right? Because to me, it depends on where you are stage in life. When I started Dreamwater, I was 30 years old, and my ex-wife now at the time, but we're still very friendly, and baby mama tells me she's pregnant with my daughter, right, my first kid. Your risk tolerance necessarily changes when you have others besides yourself that are dependent on you, right? A spouse, a child, a parent, whatever the case might be. And then, obviously now I'm 41, right? And so what my risk tolerance looks like today, after, 10, 11 years in hardcore journey and entrepreneurship, you have to have those conversations with yourself and see what the motivations are. And if I could say it like this, to me, the funny thing is, as you say those three things, what gets me out of bed, what really moves the needle for me, is working on cool, complex, big shit. I just like that. And I think that I always used to say that because I try to be introspective. I try to think about these things and try to be more intentional with what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. But when I saw the amount of money that I had in my bank account after selling Dreamwater, and it was just another normal day for me, that's where I kind of believed my own bullshit, if I could say it like that. Yeah,
yeah, like you still wanted to wake up and solve cool, complicated shit. Otherwise, you're gonna be happy.
I didn't go on a vacation, and I went basically from Dreamwater to, in my immediate family, we're very entrepreneurial. We work together, we help each other out, and we participate with each other. And we've been building for, I think we're in year 7 of one of the larger vertically integrated cannabis companies in Massachusetts. So I never took time off. I think that was a mistake, but I just kind of went from, Dreamwater into all the complexities that come with trying to build a cannabis business, no
regulation issues, no complexity. It's just like selling.
Zero.
Yeah.
Zero.
Right? Just like selling.
Nobody understands what any of that stuff is anyway. So who cares, right?
Well, and David, I love the context, because it's setting the tone for, for the rest of the conversation about why you did what you did with Dreamwater. And because the reason I want to take the growth stage story first, because there's a whole lot of stuff we can talk about the exits, especially because you were academically trained from your background on how to handle those situations. So let's talk about why did you start it? Were you having trouble sleeping and cool, complicated shit? How did you identify that this is the idea that you wanted to go into the crazy abyss and the roller coaster that was going to happen?
Yeah, I think that we don't appreciate what what the roller coaster even looks like, because we don't know, right? Like, so just to level set that, right? Like the abyss is, I think, a better word, right? Like,
that's a good point.
We'll go. Let's see what happens, right? So there are over 70 diagnosed sleep disorders. And for me, especially in my late 20s, early 30s, my biggest issue was my head didn't shut off at night. So even if I was exhausted at 11 or 12 o'clock, at night, that could easily turn into 2 a.m. for me. I still have to wake up at a normal hour, and it would be taxing. Now, myself and my approach, especially in the in that time period, was I don't need sleep. I don't need as much sleep or anything like that. I've come to learn the importance of sleep in every way, right? Like, so I chuckle sort of thinking just what my mindset was like then in terms of sleep and being dismissive of it, and the importance of sleep in our day-to-day lives, in our abilities to perform at a high level and what have you. So basically, I was doing investment banking in 08, 09 in New York, and my co-founder came in looking to raise some money. Now, if you remember what 08, 09 felt like and looked like.
Say we're slinging credit default swaps, man.
But I used to tell people, as an investment banker in New York City, during that meltdown and crisis, people used to say, "What are you doing?" I say, "I have a front row seat to the end of the world," because it really was. I mean, and now that we have sort of a second crisis here, I guess in the last 10 years around this, it was a completely different crisis then, because you had a freeze up of the credit markets. So you couldn't do anything. Like, nobody knew how to loan to you. What do we do, right?
The markets just stopped.
Stopped. Like, it was complete. That was the abyss right there, right? Like what we were looking at. Anyway, so, it sucked. It was hard to wake up every day, go to work. There was no shortage of people that needed to do transactions and deals and raise money and what have you, but there was no way to really place it. I don't care if you're a big firm, small firm, whatever. It was very complicated. And then all of a sudden I met my co-founder, this guy, Vincent. He gave me this 8-ounce poorly packaged kind of syrupy thing called Dream Water. And I'm not into pills and I'm not into any of that stuff. But I said, you know what, I'll try it. And I took it probably like at 9 o'clock at night, because I didn't want to take it close to bedtime and say, well, I was tired anyway, and that's why that happened. And by like 9:30, I was out. I woke up without an alarm clock, probably like at 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, which is what happens when you have a good night of sleep, right? Like, that was a lot of hours of sleep. And I woke up with two thoughts. I just said, did I really just find the anti-Red Bull? This has to exist, right? Like, there's no way I just stumbled on the anti-Red Bull. And then the second thought, the first thought was, I can't believe that worked on me, right? Because sleep aids don't really work on me. And so I was shocked. And then I was like, did I really just find the anti-Red Bull? There has to be a market for this. And when we talk about sort of that fucked up entrepreneurial gene, this is what that means. I was just like so geeked up over and the complexity of something. Can I take this thing that has never existed and bring it to market? And so there was never a Me Too moment. There was never like in terms of copying something and making it better or anything like that. That goes back to the complexity. That goes back to how big of an opportunity is it, and the naivete of not understanding what it's like to dance with Duane Reed or Walmart or Target, what have you. I think serves a purpose, to some degree, right? And people, I think, overrate experience sometimes, because not understanding the gravity of selling to a Target or a Walmart or whatever in the moment was probably a much better thing from a mindset perspective that allowed me as a 30-year-old to go in and play with the biggest retailers in the world.
Man, so many comments on that. And like, it's really interesting that you bring that up too, because like the naivety, I'm not saying that right, is the ability to just not know what you're in for. I think, and so you have this idea, and by the way, there's this amazing book that that came across for my twin 5-year-olds, David, that is about ideas and fostering this idea and taking this idea, and then it takes over the world. And it's so interesting because it's so in line with entrepreneurs, where you just can't ignore, especially if it's near and dear to your heart because of a problem it's solved for you. And then being naive and not knowing what you're in for. I watch very, very, very smart advisors, David, never take the leap because they know what it's like. And so they're really smart, but they don't have the crazy fucked up gene like you talked about to just jump off the cliff and hopefully their parachute comes up. So I think it's an interesting combination of how you brought that up. And what's super fascinating to me, David, about your background, of your family and your education, is a lot of people stick to the idea and wanting to help others as it relates to sleep. And then they realize like 10 years later, oh, I have a business. Like, what do I do with this whole thing? They never knew what working capital was. They never knew like wages versus the value of the company or any of the stuff that, whether it was your parents that helped you teach that, or you learned that through them, or through your experience in the academic world. So I don't know if there's a question in there, is like, when you're thinking about Dream Water and how you want to take this idea to market, how did you balance I want to take this idea to help other people and we got to have kind of a plan to be able to deal with the abyss?
So no, and I think that's a really interesting place to think through, right? Like, what comes to mind is like this. My dad has sold billions of dollars worth of fragrances over his career, right? At retail and in wholesale. And I remember I was probably 2 to 3 months in market. We launched with Duane Reed in mid-December 2009. And because I've lived in New York several times in my life, so New York's kind of like a second home, but I'm from Miami. And here in Miami, where I lived, I probably put some Dream Water in a couple local stores near me. And this early on in the process, I remember I got an email from an aunt whose nephew, so her sister's son, had gotten into a terrible motorcycle accident. And that because of Dream Water, her and her sister, the boy's mom, were able to sleep correctly and deal with a 30-day hospitalization. And be able to sleep there with him and be there for him. So it was basically like a letter of thanks and appreciation, a pretty long email. And I remember it was a Sunday morning when I got it, because I was walking into a brunch with my dad, with my family. And I say, "Pa, look at this." I turn around my phone. He reads the thing and he goes, "In all my years of selling perfume," and I had just started Dream Water, "in all my years of selling perfume, nobody has ever said thank you to me. Nobody." And so that kind of just stuck with me, because, and I think it's shaped a little bit because, without jumping too far ahead, I didn't have a dedicated customer service department. A lot of it, and as much as I could, I wanted it to route through me, because I wanted to be able to hear from people, good, bad, or indifferent, sort of what they were thinking, what they were doing, how they were using it, the impact that it's having on their lives, and so on and so forth. And it is that element. That's why I said your 3 prongs are interesting to me, because more days than not suck in this process, in this journey. At least they did in mine.
I'm laughing because I couldn't agree with you more, man. It's hard.
Well,
it's hard.
But when you take a prong, like, what is the impact that you're making? That's what kept me in the game. That's what kept me. I mean, my younger brother was my head of sales and really somebody that I leaned on operationally and as a partner, and Vincent. Both of them burnt out in this Dream Water process at one point or another. The thing that kept me going just was that we had a really good product that was really helping people. And I'm not saying that for any ulterior motive other than to say, like, you have to be able to grasp at something. So when the money's not there, right? The prongs were the money, the impact, and the happiness. When the money and the happiness aren't there, what lets you go to the office the next day? What lets you rally your team day in and day out and day in and day out? And so I don't say it for altruistic purposes or to sound cool or interesting, whatever. That is not a small piece, that impact. And I should say this by way of a disclaimer, there are so many people I've met that are super passionate about the beverage space or the food space or even functional topics like sleep itself. I was never into sleep per se, and I was never into consumer products. I was never a beverage guy. It's just that the proposition of all of it together made so much sense to me. And what geeked me up, what got me going, was simply that, can we do this? It was sort of always internally, even this like David Goliath mindset, where we're David and we're playing against the Johnson & Johnson Goliath, in these retailers and in this shop. The Unilever Goliath, the Procter & Gamble, Goliath. Does that make sense? So like when I 100%. Just as a higher level order of what it means when I say I like the challenge or the bigger the opportunities, that's what geeked me up. It wasn't really a passion around sleep or beverage, right?
It's this intrinsic desire, like you said, because like if it's surfacey, I mean, you're gonna want to quit. I mean, like it's miserable sometimes. And I mean, how many times I've heard people say, I don't want this to be another reinvestment year because they're not making enough money, right? And so like, I think that's it's super interesting about my journey, David, is that once you realize that this company is going to be worth something as a financial asset, and like that should hopefully let people get a little bit of less anxiety, because at some point you should have a plan to liquidate this to create the wealth. So you don't have to solve it.
How does that work, Ryan? Because I could tell you, I mean, it sounds nice. It sounds nice. And there are definitely businesses out there that are built for P&L purposes and to generate cash flow. Mm-hmm. But when you're prospecting, when you're doing something that has never been done before, you don't know what those parameters really look like. And in the space that I was playing in, it is really an expensive proposition to have to go play with Walmart, Walgreens, mm-hmm. Target, CVS, and what have you. And not just expensive because of them, it's the overall dynamics of it. Again, I can get into a lot of specifics, but like, you know, with any amount of success, there's so many people out there that are trying to knock you down. Mm-hmm. And again, we can get into some examples of that or what have you. But if it's just about sort of that money component, well, I would have burnt out. You know, mm-hmm. It wouldn't have lasted for me because I paid myself $0 for the first 5 years of my Dream Water journey. I sold in year 8, just to put it in perspective. And I don't mean that facetious. I literally mean 0, because every time that I had a little bit more money in my bank account, I wanted to go hire somebody else. Mm-hmm. I wanted to spend more on creating brand awareness and marketing efforts and what have you. All of those things tend to decrease cash, you know, not necessarily increase cash.
100%.
You know, and what have you. And in my best years, I wasn't really making enough money for me to live. Oh, and by the way, in those first 5 years, I went through a divorce where my ex got more than half of my own shit. And all of this. So like the deck was stacked against me. And I didn't know that it was going to be worth anything ever in this process. The only time it was really worth something was when I actually effectuated a sale. So just put that in perspective, right? Like, not everything is like that you can reasonably predict or mm-hmm. get your business to a point where you're like, I know that it's a financial asset right now. It was really, for me, if we're being honest, kind of a burden, because I couldn't move on to any other aspect of my life. My younger brother Joseph, who was my head of sales, he was able to move on. We moved him on to build our cannabis business. You know, Massachusetts, not to have all of our eggs in one basket. You know, my co-founder mm-hmm. Vin went out and built a whole sales and rep organization into the consumer product space. Into this retail space, and built a whole sales organization for it. Great. They were able to move on. I was not able to move on, and I didn't know that it was going to be a financial asset again until I sold. So, just wanted to level set.
Okay, so I'm tracking that. And my question though is, like, because of your investment banking or background of your family, do you think that it's reasonable to say that you had a better understanding that the gamble that you were taking than some others who might not understand that this is a asset? Because again, to re-clarify too, those 3 things of wealth, fun, and impact have to all be tied together. It's like the stool. Like, you can't only focus on one. So, and that's my point is, if you're lacking the wealth or understanding that this could be something, then you wake up and you go, what in the hell is this all for? Because I'm having fun, I'm solving complicated shit, and I'm making an impact to help other people sleep. But at some point, like, I have to understand what the gamble, like the odds are that this could be something.
So it was very, very hard. And I think I look back at my situation. When I was in my 20s, my dad is self-made. So, he moved to this country, awesome. Like many immigrants, with $0 and hustled his way into whatever, into building a huge, set of companies, not just one. And in my 20s, I always had this thing where I wanted to be self-made, right? I didn't want to be it because I was my father's son. Mm-hmm. In my 30s, I came to appreciate being my father's son. And one of the things that I appreciate about it was that while I leaped I took the leap off the cliff with no parachute, right? Where we jumped into the abyss. My dad, let's call it, was that floaty air bubble down at the bottom that will catch me in the worst of worst cases. I think that that's what allowed me to keep going. Because if it was about needing to pay myself and make money, I would have, even if I didn't burn out, I would have probably had to either take very different sort of steps, or I would have had to close up shop. Mm-hmm. Even though I had no debt, no bells and whistles on the equity that would have forced my hand, something would have necessitated it. And mm-hmm. if I didn't have, let's call it, the ultimate backstop of my father, not that I had to tap into it too much, but thank God. But it probably would have shifted my approach. It would have shifted my journey, and probably in ways that would have been detrimental, to the overall outcome. And so does that, in my totally, specific case, that's why I was able to handle that financial prong not being strong.
Yep. No,
but it weighed on me, Ryan. It was something that I had to be present for, especially, I had some come to Jesus conversations with my father, not because my father was forcing me to something. My dad was the one saying the financial part matters, right? In the prongs, right? He was the one saying you can't just do the other things and have it be good enough, right? Like it has to mean something, financially.
The only thing I'll attribute it to is the 4 or 5 years that I was hustling after we sold to create this business. I met my partner Pat, and he goes, "Hey man, I am let's solve everybody's problem, but I'm also a capitalist." And that's why I gravitate towards this book and this concept called conscious capitalism, because we can't just be a nonprofit by helping everybody else without making money. And I'm like, okay. But no, I think it's important that everybody's situation is different, that impacts their risk or their ability to, ultimately reach where they want to go. So I want to pull into the scaling of the business, David, because you did some very interesting things and some interesting context, man. Is the two partners that I have at my business were actually in the SME business where they were selling products into Kroger. So they would actually meet with all the brands, huge billion-dollar brands that they'd get them into Kroger. And so I've learned a lot more about that industry than I ever thought I would have. And it's really interesting. And like you had said, a lot of their clients would have been like, hey, my daughter's got celiac, so I created a granola bar that's gluten-free. And so a lot of it was like people that had problems, but then all of a sudden they get into this, enormous retail chain and like, holy shit, I got a business and what do I do with all this stuff? So it's interesting. So I'm curious, when you went to say, okay, how are we going to scale this? How did you go about thinking about how you were going to scale the business?
I would say at the beginning, right? The US is a giant market and geography. So we were faced with, sort of one fundamental question. What do we do with this? Where do we launch? What does that look like? Now, again, we ended up launching with Duane Reed in mid-December 2009. So 2010 was really our first year. Let me level set. Instagram didn't exist. Our primary, even Facebook, all the advertising tools that you see and all that stuff, whatever, I don't even know if they were rolled out at all.
Right. I don't think they were.
The digital marketing landscape was really Google AdWords. I mean, that was really that and whatever snake oil an SEO salesman was giving you, right? Like, oh, I'll SEO you and you'll be at the top of Google and it'll be organic, and somehow it never worked, right? So just to level set what was going on then. Now, myself and the people that I roped in to start with me, which was my younger brother, a friend of mine at the time, and Vincent, we all had our roots in New York. Like we had roots, right? Like even though my brother and I are from Miami, we had roots in New York. And so at the time, at the very beginning, when I started to work on this project, to even talk to you about what I was doing, I'd make you sign an NDA. What am I signing an NDA for? I can't tell you, or whatever. I'd write some vague reference in the NDA. And all of that was on purpose because, again, something like this had never existed and I didn't want to get beat. Now, mind you, I started really working on this in the summer of 2009, and I was in market chain-wide with Duane Reed by mid-December 2009. Whoa. So you're talking about from idea to formulation to actually, ending up in a major retail shelf, which, again, I did not appreciate how fast that was of a process.
That's crazy.
7-8 months, or what have you. But my entire... The entire thesis of it was do we have something? So it wasn't with a scaling mindset, or it wasn't like, oh my God, I'm building this and I'm gonna have $100 million exit. It was literally, do we have something? And to get to that point, the first 100K or so came out of my pocket, which was a substantial amount of my savings. But again, when you're younger and you don't really have too many responsibilities, whatever, and you have the backstop of my father,
roll the dice.
Yeah, right. It makes it. Being honest, it makes it a little easier to trigger that fucked up, entrepreneurial gene. But what I did was I did a $1 million friends and family round, and why that number was not based on some industry study or market study or anything like that. I just said it's a nice round number to be able to come into the market and see what I have, or so I thought, right? And then when we had to think about where and how to launch, I said, well, this NDA stuff is going to stop. And why start in an ancillary market like Miami, because that would be the easiest place for me to start. I want to know what I have, right? That's the whole idea. So I went straight to New York. And that was the geography component of it, right? We're like, let's not putz around in ancillary markets. Let's go straight to the main one, because once we're in market, I don't want to have to catch up to the one that copied my idea and did it in New York, right?
Right.
The other part was that I was always sort of very clear on is fish where the fish are. So if I told you, go get me a bottle of water, a single serve bottle of water, or a Coca-Cola or whatever, I would say 9.9 out of 10 people will say, okay, in their mind, they already thought of a convenience store, right? 7-Eleven, what have you. But if I told you, go get me a headache medicine or something for my sleep, you're going to think drugstore. And so once we settled in on geography and that we were like, let's just go big and see what we have, right? It wasn't like to prove something out or anything like, oh my God, scale. And we said, okay, drugstore, because people who are going to look for sleep aids are going to go to a drugstore. The answer was Duane Reed. So if you know New York City at all or whatever, there's a Duane Reed on every corner. It's basically a convenience store and a drugstore, but at its core, it's a drugstore. And so anyway, so that's what gave us Duane Reed. And then we were able to look internally and say, which one of us has the ability to get into Duane Reed? Like, how do we get into Duane Reed? But that's kind of how that came to be. So when you say, tell us the process or the journey, I mean, I think it's important to sort of acknowledge that that's how we ultimately figured out what to do and how to come into market. Was something that we were being very protective about, up until market launch.
And the crucial part of what I'm hearing here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's this unbelievable desire to figure out, what do I have here? The itching of the complicated shit, launching something of a new product in market. And you bring up a bunch of really good points again, because if you launch in Miami, you get into a couple places, Johnson & Johnson or Procter & Gamble, whoever the competition is, could easily find it.
David. Another David will just
right.
speak you to it. It won't be Johnson & Johnson, not at that level, but it will be another David. Yeah.
Well, and so let's talk about then like the implications of getting into Duane Reed. Like what I find super fascinating about the business model of getting into big retail stores, and maybe you can give a little bit more background on that process, but like you could go from zero to like big real fast. And so did that scratch your itch of figuring out what did you have and what was the implications on revenue, infrastructure, inventory, manufacturing, like on the actual business that went from an idea to a huge business?
Sure. Small questions to start with, right? Like,
sorry, I have a tendency to do that. Just
First of all, I think it's important to acknowledge so many people have this goal, this idea that I want to get into Duane Reed. I want to get into Walmart. And for me, it's not about getting into these retailers. It's about how you're in these retailers. So if they take your product and they put you at the bottom of the sleep aid section, what's called inline, in the sleep aid section, and you're at the bottom of the sleep aid section, you have almost no chance at success. Whereas whenever I was getting impulsive opportunities or display opportunities or even eye level placement or things like that in line, the sales were obviously much better and all of that. So it's a double-edged sword, right? Because it's, again, for me, not about getting in, it's about how you're in. And I could also say as a side note to that, I was present to that in the moment because I have said no to and or pissed off every retailer in this country at least once. And I don't say that as a matter of pride. I say that as a matter to illustrate that when you don't have a good program at one of these retailers, you spend the rest of your retailer experience defending, justifying, trying to do something with that placement. And that's so destructive to you from a mindset perspective, from a business journey perspective, and what have you. And it's worth, I think, acknowledging again that we're sitting here at the end of 2021 recording this, and the D2C landscape and environment is so much more developed than what it was before, from everything from lead gen to transactional capabilities to the consumer's confidence in all of these individual platforms or aggregators like Amazon and what have you.
And just for a point of clarification, David, is so D2C meaning direct to consumer, and again, because I've had actually a couple of the Amazon aggregators on the show, and so again with Amazon and Shopify and Facebook ads and Instagram ads, that's just changed the distribution channel, how consumers potentially buy. Is that, any other clarification points you want on that?
But also what the manufacturers or companies like mine could do.
Yeah,
we didn't have Shopify in 2010. It didn't exist. So I remember, I forget what, maybe my first platform was WooCommerce or something like that for my website. And then at one point we had this brilliant idea to use Magento, which if you know anything about this stuff, it's like the worst. Nobody knows how to program it. It's so
and it's really expensive to install too, right?
all of it, right? And so that's what I mean. It's not just it's a convergence of everything, right? Like, that Shopify exists, and what have you. But I say that only to say that, like, one of the things I wish I was better at the beginning was this direct to consumer mindset or platform and focus. But for me, it just always seemed, but again, you have to remember what it was like in 2010, let's say, or 11 or 12. Amazon, while it was gigantic already, it was not what it is today, right? It wasn't as pervasive. It was so the one thing that I would say is I wish I was better at that, but I did come from a background of retail, physical retail, and consumer product, wholesaling. So like on the fragrance side, we would sell to all the big box, let's say, department stores, the Sephoras, the Macy's, the Nordstroms, and so on and so forth. So I had exposure to all that, so it sort of just seemed to make sense to me. And but I think that the direct to consumer component of this, it could have been bigger, badder, better, for Dreamwater, except that just in the moment it just wasn't what it is today.
It wasn't developed the way it was at all. And so which I think your background with the family business definitely gave some interesting insights on how to get into it. And so I was listening to your John Warlow podcast. You had talked about how manufacturing and making it is different than selling it. And I think and with that context, the probably the second part of my jumbled amount of questions was, when you get in to them, with your clarification of like how you're getting in, but like essentially now you have this huge footprint of distributions that consumers can now buy your stuff. Before the internet, it was, people walking across the corner into a Duane Reed and saying, I want this now, or in the airport or whatever it was. And people that don't anticipate what that looks like after 6 months, like, of how can I actually have the capacity to make this, the working capital, the inventory, just like the ability to manufacture that much supply versus selling it and getting it in and working with these retailers. Explain the difference and what you mean by making it versus selling it, and how that impacted your business model as you guys continue to grow into the distribution channels.
Yes. So as a distinction there, what I was effectively saying is, are you in the manufacturing business? What business are you in, right? And again, not necessarily on purpose, but I was sort of always clear that I was in the business of selling and marketing Dreamwater, not making it, although I had to worry about making it too. The distinction being that I worked with third-party co-packers, what's referred to as a co-packer, and I can tell you that a lot of private equity folks would have conversations with me that sounded like this. We would love to take you, buy your own production facility, right? And be a vertically integrated operation. Because in a lot of cases, when you're an upstart, kind of intangible, you're growing, but they don't know what to do with you, they can fund PP&E, right? And so when you say, like, so they know how to invest into and write and underwrite deals around plant, property, and equipment.
Stuff.
But I was like, that's a totally different business, right? I'd prefer to put the onus of GMP certifications and compliance with the FDA rules and everything like that on them, and pay them a premium to do that. Machines are always breaking. I don't want to deal with that problem and not only that, but to do all of that is going to require cash to invest into the back-end infrastructure that would maybe make sense if I was a company 10 times my size, maybe, right? But at my stage, whatever cash I had, I wanted to invest in building the brand, not in the guts, operationally speaking, of manufacturing it. Doesn't mean that I didn't make investments into my manufacturing partners, which I did on multiple stages because I wanted to improve their lines and their, quality controls or production capabilities. And then we would work out a payment plan around it or whatever. But it was about really partnering with my manufacturing base. My two primary, even though we're based in Florida, my head of manufacturing, I had my own W-2 head of manufacturing, was there for every run. He lived in Dallas. We 3PL'd out of Dallas. We produced out of Dallas and Phoenix. And so when there was runs in Phoenix, my guy in Dallas would go to Phoenix and so on and so forth. So that's what I mean, that I still worried about making it, right? But I was very clear that my investments in as much as possible, doesn't mean that I didn't invest in my co-packers, but my investments as much as possible had to be, in my mind, forward-facing, consumer-facing, and really continue to build the brand.
Super interesting. And I love the context, because I think a lot of people on the show or listening to the show might not know enough, or might not know a bunch about that process. Because again, like I said, even though I've been exposed to business for a long time, I've learned a lot through my partners who are kind of in that the consumer space and the food space. Can you explain, David, how that manifests itself in your operation? So when you said you had your own head of manufacturing, just kind of give us the overview of like, how was it made? Like through partners, or like what did that like infrastructure look like? How was it made? And then what was your organization structured like? Like what was the day-to-day activities that was doing the selling and, like you said, expanding the brand?
So operationally speaking, we only ever used 4 co-packers, but 2 primary for most of the experience. In an overly simplistic way, it's just there wasn't a lot of places that could make Dream Water. We were what's called a hot fill product. So we were filling our bottles, because we were not using preservatives. We were filling our bottles at 180 degree filling temperatures.
Oh, wow.
So the bottle itself had to be able to withstand that heat. So like your 5-hour energy bottle cannot. So we had to have the right bottle. And there was literally, we were probably in the only facilities that had the ability to run hot into shots, and all of that stuff, whatever. We had to get resourceful to find these places. Ultimately, I'll say like one little trick that I had was I found this bottle, this actual structure of a bottle, which is an Amcor bottle, the plastic part. I found the bottle. And when I needed to find a production facility, I said, oh, who makes this mold, this bottle mold, right? Oh, this company called Amcor. Amcor's like the biggest bottle manufacturer in the US. So I call Amcor and I said, where are you shipping these bottles to?
That's awesome,
right?
Man. Yeah.
Because they told me these places. So how did I find my co-packers? I went to the bottle manufacturer to tell me where to go.
What was the bottle that you saw? Like, what was it full? No, but like, how did you find that bottle? Because obviously Dream Water wasn't in it.
I actually found it in what I call my first co-packer that I never really used. There was this guy outside of Pittsburgh. And I remember I was living in New York, and I drove with Vincent over to Pittsburgh to see this production facility, and we're like, oh my God, and we were blown away. And I think it was called Castle or something. And the guy was actually kind of helpful. Like, he level set a lot of things for us right from the beginning or whatever, but he couldn't run our product, even the 8 ounce. But it was in his facility that I saw that bottle.
Super cool.
I credit that being kind of my first co-packer, but it wasn't. And then I found a co-packer actually outside of Tampa. It just happened to be. And then when we were in Tampa, there was a couple experiences there that taught me the importance of redundancy. I can get into that if that's remotely interesting to you. That taught me the importance of redundancy. And where Vincent actually, who ended up being my COO, Vincent actually ended up hiring an operational consultant because we didn't know what we didn't know, and we wanted to know how good was their line from a QC perspective, from a production capabilities perspective, like you're talking about, how much can it scale, and things like that. And then that guy, along with Amcor, helped us find what was our primary for a while in Dallas, and then ultimately our final sort of primary out of Phoenix. This company called AZ.
And so, like, these, when you're talking about co-packers, the 3PL, like these are partners that are helping you make Dream Water, and then you're selling it into retail stores, right? So, like, what was some of the, like, going back to your redundancy? So when you're thinking about scaling operations, and I think that's what from what I've gathered from my partners is, like, a lot of the brands that get into Kroger or whatnot don't anticipate what it's going to do to their operations. So they're not ready for the things that you just talked about. So what are the conversations between redundancy or quality or things that you, even though you're not making it, you're responsible for? Because what Duane Reed is going to go to you and say, David, we have recalls or issues or whatever it might be. You're on the line, not your partners. So how does that?
Correct.
How did you go about, like, anticipating that, having these conversations?
So I never wanted to be beholden to anybody, and I don't mean that just from a QC perspective. Like, I want to be able to negotiate better terms and all that. I should start off by acknowledging that I'm a relatively single SKU vendor. I had some different flavors. I ultimately ended up, from an innovation perspective, creating different functionality, for different delivery formats. I have a Dream Water powder, which is really what I use. I like to use it. It's like a powder stick that you can take, like, with or without water. I take it like a pixie stick. I never wanted to be beholden to one entity. I wanted to be able to tease it. And I was lucky enough to have a product that I was 100% manufactured in the US. My bottles were blown here. Some of the componentry would take some, but everything was US centric. So I didn't have to deal with like, freighting it over on water, from China or any of that stuff. Right. Mm-hmm. So that gave me some amount of, let's call it flexibility. I didn't have to be out cash as much as I had to be out. Like if you put a PO with a factory in China, and by the time that they deliver to you, it's a huge cycle. I didn't have that. Mm-hmm. I was lucky enough to be a U.S. manufactured product, and that the componentry was substantially, here in the U.S. The idea of redundancy was not just that. It was also that I didn't want to be operationally knocked out. So the quick story on that is, in Tampa, when we were in Tampa, so we went kind of Duane Reed to Walmart. Walmart called me. Wow. And so by the end of 2010, I was already in Walmart. So I launched with Duane Reed. My plan was to be very focused on New York City. And we did a tremendous amount of stuff into New York City only, while having a website. So like if you found it in New York and you went back home to Kansas City or whatever, like you would be able to get your dream water. I used the website for infill purposes, not anything else really at the beginning. And when we went to Walmart, right? Oh my God, we're in Walmart. We're going to get into that growth and that scale. And that was not part of our plan. It was just constantly reacting to it. We go and we do a run in our Tampa Bay facility. And literally let's call it the warehouse next door, because it was an industrial park, had a fire. And the soot of the smoke got into our facility. Oh. And at the time, we were doing all of our fulfillment directly from the co-packer, because moving water, even though they're little shots of water, is very heavy and expensive. I didn't want to move it unnecessarily. I wanted to move it as little as possible. I would always say, let me or the retailer make the money, not FedEx, right? Like and so imagine that I'm about to ship my first programs into Walmart, and all of my inventory is now in quarantine. Oh,
that's the abyss. You couldn't have seen that.
It happens to be that we had done a test run with this co-packer out of Dallas. It was actually in Coppell, Texas. It was near Fort Worth, near Love Field Airport. And I literally turned around and I said, here's a PO immediately. Like, I need a run right now. So not just for financial purposes, that ability to say, okay, shit, I'm fucked there in Tampa, but I know I'm not cut off. And when you want to play with these big boys, means that to me that instead of driving down for the net best cost, because I kind of drive more volume to one retailer, what I ended up being very clear on and doing was I would go kind of like 2/3 of my production to one, 1/3 to the other. And I was very programmatic with that. I was very communicative about that. We would do 10 plus runs a year. So I was just in time kind of manufacturing within reason from the beginning. So all of that stuff was sort of aligning, and I never got into short dated product, having to close out product. I never had to do any of that stuff because I was always the conduit between sort of sales and manufacturing, and helping the manufacturing guy plan out the runs and what do we need for raw materials and, all that stuff. So I always sort of played that conductor of the orchestra, between both sides. Vincent was very helpful, especially at the beginning, sort of smoothing some of this stuff out and taking a lot of that burden off my plate and, stuff like that.
But what's super interesting too, like going back to one of your earlier comments, is that what business are you in, right? If you had chosen to be the manufacturer, I can't even imagine spinning all that up. First of all, you're taking the risk because you don't know if you're going to deploy, if the consumers are going to, buy it. But then you're like, how much, like what, probably $20 million into equipment and plants and all that stuff and hoping. And then you're not, that situation happens to you. And so it's just interesting when you think about what business you're in, that you were the orchestra, you were the general contractor, managing manufacturing and sales, but responsible for the brand. And what was it on the last question on the manufacturing piece you mentioned earlier about compliance? And I don't know what ingredients are in there. I don't know if it's melatonin or if they're like what's specifically in the water, because that might have, I don't know if the FDA has got some sort of say in it, but like, where does all of that compliance reside?
So it's a combination. I can't believe I haven't said that, but it's a combination of GABA, melatonin, 5-HTP, that core base dream water formula. And so every manufacturing facility has to comply with GMP practices, good manufacturing practices, a lot of FDA regulation and oversight. It's not bullshit. It's real. I of course, my whole mentality when doing Dream Water itself and as a shot was always to strip away every reason why somebody wouldn't want to pick it up. So I even made this product, besides being natural and, just a lightly flavored water and what have you, I also even made it OU certified kosher. So because kosher and halal, if you follow either one of those things, like a lot of people that follow halal here in the US will at least look at kosher certifications because it's the same dietary rules and restrictions. So even something like that, I was like, I don't want anybody to have a reason to not pick this up, right? And try it. The OU certs and the certifications and all that stuff was maybe as much of a pain in the ass as the FDA, but it would have been so easy for me to just give it up. I don't think it was core to anybody but me, but I wanted to stay true to the fact that this thing has to be, every reason why somebody wouldn't pick it up has to be removed. And so I would say the OU certifying, compliance was probably more. And it's crazy because, you go to these co-packing facilities in the middle of like Dallas or Tampa, like these are American people, and all that. They know more about kosher than the most religious of Jews.
It's the best, man. Yeah, like the irony there is just amazing.
The rabbis have to go and be in these facilities and they have to explain all these rules to these guys that otherwise don't understand any of them. But they are prolific at understanding how to do kosher related stuff.
Because it's associated with making money.
Yeah.
So when going in then to the operations or the setup that you guys have for your organization, what was the amount of staff? And I don't know if you're comfortable sharing some revenue numbers or some ranges, because I'm assuming revenue takes off. Walmart calls you. So first question is, at what point did you look at yourself and say, hey, I think we actually have something? Because your main question was, do we have something? When Walmart called you, or when did you go, okay, I think we got something?
I still don't know that I've come to that conclusion, because I think it should be so much bigger than what it is, if that makes any sense. I think that in retrospect, as when I was more naive and more, novice in this whole experience, I don't think I celebrated wins enough. And I wanted to get more intentional. I've tried to get more intentional about acknowledging certain moments and things and ideas. So the Walmart thing happened because I decided to advertise in a there's one big trade show a year in this space, and it happens in July, August. It's moved around a little bit, but July, August of each year. And we had advertised in a trade magazine, and so I guess the guy who bought 5 Hour and brought it into Walmart, which was a massive success, this guy Bill Spradlin, all of a sudden I get a phone call, and I was literally boarding a plane to go to this show in San Diego. I was literally boarding the plane, and he goes, hey, is this David? Yeah. My boss, Yale Martin, is going to be at the show. I'm not going to the show, but Yale knows that you're going, and you need to find him. I said, okay, Bill, thank you. Cool.
Deal.
All right. Again, zero part of my plan was to go to Walmart, right? Or push past Walmart. I was just New York centric in the moment. I was going to my first trade show ever, as part of the Dream Morning experience. What do I know? And I find Yale, and super awesome guy, both of them. And I find Yale, and then, I have a conversation with him. I get approached by a bunch of Walmart brokers. I guess they saw us interacting and talking, and I kind of just rolled with it. And then a couple of days, we're back in the office, and I get a phone call from Bill. And I worked out of my dad's office, and my dad's assistant says, there's a Bill on the phone or whatever. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll take it. And he goes, I'm setting my modular. They're called planograms and modulars in Walmart. He goes, son, when can you come out and visit me? And I said, where are you? And he goes, we're in Northwest Regional Arkansas. That's I said, what airport do I fly into? And he goes, he's like, can you come out and see me? And I said, sure. When do you want me? He goes, tomorrow. I was like, okay. I didn't even know where to go. I was like, okay. So I went with my younger brother to Bentonville, Arkansas. We flew into NWA as the airport code, and we had a meeting with Bill. And we walked out of the meeting with Bill, and I turned to my brother, and I said, I think we just sold Walmart. And he says maybe, and we just kind of went about our day. It was just not a big deal. Again, there's good parts to that, because I was never scared of the moment, right? Whereas if I knew, oh my God, I have this opportunity to sell to Walmart, I was never scared of the moment. But in retrospect, I just wish I would have celebrated that a little bit more, because
why weren't you excited?
It was just another day. And, oh, great. So I get to sell them and ship them in 3 months. What did I actually have to do today? That was probably my mindset. Like I had a certain amount of shit to do that day. The Walmart thing I wasn't being facetious. It was literally like, can you come out tomorrow? And I said, yes. Like, it was like that. So I had whatever I had to do, that day or whatever. So I was just like, great, I got to get back on a computer. Like I have stuff to do. And so we didn't really, enjoy it or celebrate it, or anything like that.
So is it more of like the calibration between like what it could be and why it's not that big of a deal? Or is it like, or do you keep moving the goalposts? You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to understand how to.
I'm terrible at goal setting, if I could say it like this. I'm terrible at goal setting because my mind is wired to say, if you do enough of the right steps in between, the how, not the end point, but the elements that you need to do to get to that end point, my supposition is that whatever your goal is, whatever that outcome is going to be way bigger than anything you could have projected. So let's say, not to sound, if I go in and I say to CVS, listen, I believe that if you give me a display opportunity, right, like whatever the display is, or put me on the register and I'm going to sell 20 of these a day, and I model that for them, oh, that's great, whatever. But what I found was that if I was able to open up on a regional basis, because I was selling to, say, CVS or Walgreens corporate, but I figured out how to sell to these retailers on a regional level, district by district, area by area, in certain key markets. And what I was finding was every time that I put the bottles on the front ends, the sales were way bigger than anything I can project credibly. Way bigger. That's what I mean by I like to focus on the process. How do I open up more of those opportunities and do so with this ability to ultimately scale? So this goes back to the mentality that what I really wanted to do was have data. Data would say, here's what we are, here's what we mean, so that when I go back to Walgreens or CVS and say, give me this opportunity, it's because their own data is telling them that I'm not lying to them. It's their own data in their own stores, and they see the benefit of those dollars. And I'm doing it in a way that fits their merchandising and display guidelines. Right. So I would always do it in a way that if they said yes to these things, we could do it at scale of all of their stores. Right.
So is it more like how accurate is this statement? Is it when you're thinking about like walking out of that Walmart store, it's still just an idea? You're not getting the data and it's not real yet. Is it part of that?
Yeah, I think that was just I had shit to do. It wasn't even.
I love it. That's a decent answer, man. I get it.
It wasn't deeper than that, Like, it wasn't like a sort of like calculated thought. It was just like, I have shit to do, man. This was annoyance. I didn't plan to come here.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. But I mean that more in terms of like focusing on getting those stores and on cracking the code at the point of sale was more important to me than selling 20 units per store, because if I cracked that code correctly, all of a sudden I'm selling 40 units per store. And I couldn't even necessarily project that credibly at 20. But once I have the data, it's credible. And that could be a stepping stone to punching above my weight, to asking for bigger programs.
Got it. Super helpful. So then going to like on the organizational structure, I know we're getting close to the end of the first part here, is what was the setup of the business? Like, maybe just in wherever in the life cycle of the business, but like organizationally, was it salespeople or brokers trying to get into these retailers, and then you said your customer service division was not that small because you're outsourcing your manufacturing. What was the organizational setup like?
So when I give my talks on this or what have you, I call it the air conditioning problem. When you're getting started, and it was me, Joseph, this kid Adam, and Vincent, we had shit to do. Like it was just, let's go, let's grind, let's think, let's strategize, whatever we were doing. But then I ended up stealing, reference my dad's assistant, this lady named Marilyn. I ended up stealing her from my dad, slowly, until I was the one that was using her, right? Like, you got to be resourceful, man. You got to be resourceful. And I don't even know that I ever asked my dad if I could actually have Marilyn. It just that I took, she gave me a finger, then I took the hand, then I took the arm, then I took the, it was a slow process. But all of a sudden, Joseph liked the office freezing, and Marilyn would be freezing at 75 degrees. So all of a sudden, I had to manage an air conditioning problem that I didn't have at the scale of 4 of us. But when we went to 5, I now have to worry about such nonsense like air conditioning, temperatures in the office. And it's not nonsense. So I'm saying that just to make a point. Like, it's not nonsense. It's important to the people that you have working for you to manage this issue correctly, right? Except when you think about I'm going to sell dream water to every retailer out there and help as many customers as I can, you're not thinking about, well, shit, part of that is going to have to be manage the air conditioning and temperature in your office. I always kind of wanted to keep this team as lean and mean as possible because, like I said, every time I had a little bit more dollars or a little bit more cash, whatever, it was either to hire somebody or to build the brand. And so I was always very cost conscious because I never had any traditional debt. I didn't have excess cash. I mean, in total, we raised about $6 million, but I never had more than 2 of it in my bank account at any given moment, and that would go away real quick. Mm-hmm. And so, I had to be very conscious of that. And as we would go to hire, it was sort of more based out of need. So, for example, at the beginning, like I think our first hire was, again, because I was stealing Marilyn from my father, so she was very involved in logistics and that kind of support. But the first hire that we probably had was somebody to do the packing in our own warehouse when I wasn't 3PLing, and it was at the beginning. Why? Because there would come to a certain point in the day where when we would receive samples to our office here, whoever was available had to break it down and bring in the product. And then at the end of the day, we literally had a thing like whenever we said it was the end of the day, because it wasn't at 5 o'clock, we would literally take off our shirts and just go to the warehouse and just pack out boxes ourselves. So we said, this is a nonsense thing to do. Like, we have other stuff to do that is more. And so like the first hire was probably that, and we would look to sort of alleviate that. The second hire was probably my mom was handling all of our QuickBooks at the beginning. Mm-hmm. It was probably like her and Vincent. So probably the next hire was a real controller, and it was sort of always as we need. I think the only frivolous thing hire I ever had, but it wasn't that way. And it started really as a logistics person that happened to have very strong Excel capabilities, was to have a data analyst almost from the beginning. She wasn't so much an analyst as she was an amazing gatherer of data and synthesizer. And that's a whole other, aspect of the conversation. Yeah. Data was so important to me from the beginning, because how else with a very lean and mean operation can you really manage, first of all, understand and then manage what is happening at these retailers. But when you have pretty good data feeds like from Walgreens or Walmart or what have you, and then you have the capture process on your side, my data gatherer, and synthesizer, this lady named Kim, when I ultimately got acquired, I remember that one of the things that they said was, we find it so interesting that you've had a data analyst since the beginning, or something like that. Like, what a weird thing at a company your size that you have somebody just dedicated to data is weird. And I said, it's the only way I can run this business, because I can understand it better. I can understand the good, the bad, what's happening, what's not happening, or I can correlate what I'm seeing at the point of sale to data. And that connection is so important to even have the ability to strategize on, how do I make that account better? How do I make that store better? How do I, improve the brand proposition? What's working? What's not? And ultimately, how do I share those insights in an easy to digest way with other stakeholders, like the buyers at Walgreens or some of my internal staff or my brokers, right? I never let a broker take a sales call. I had a W-2 sales team literally out of my office, and no retailer was ever called on. I don't care if you were 100 stores in the Northwest where you couldn't be farther away from us than not. One of my people was at every sales call with every retailer, because that was very important to me as well.
So did you use brokers to get into them, or did you have your own sales team, or did you do both? Both.
Okay. But the broker strategy ebbs and flows a little bit. And again, that's a whole other sort of, we can get very detailed into that, other than to say, for the most part, it's all what you do, right? Like, your Hollywood agent is only going to be as good as somebody who wants to book you. And if the more people want to book you, the better your agent looks. Yep. It's the same thing at retail, right? Like, make no mistake about it. The broker's relationship, even though you're the one paying them, the broker's relationship that matters is that relationship with said retailer. Oh, yeah. And if you understand that, kind of clearly, the broker might fight for you to a certain degree. They might push for you to a certain degree, but their relationship is with Walgreens, not with you.
They're not going to throw the nuclear bomb into the relationship for you, because
no matter how badly you're getting screwed over by that retailer, no matter what is going on, no matter any of that stuff, whatever. So you have to be clear on some of those things to really level set the expectations that you have of yourself, your organization, and your capabilities.
So I know we got let's wrap it up here, because we can do part 2. Is I want to leave people with a couple things, and one is, what was the triggering event that led you to start selling? So, a quick little like teaser for part 2. So, like, what was it where like you're scaling, growing, and then what was the triggering event that led you down the process?
I had a Canadian distributor. He had a small team, and we worked very, very closely together. But what was funny was in the summer of 2017, we sold in May of 2018, I was looking, because my team was running basically everything for these people. It was a buy-sell relationship, and I was doing all the work. I was taking those calls at the Canadian retailers, Shoppers Drug Mart, Loblaws, and what have you, everything in between, Rexall, and so on and so forth. So it was in the summer of 2017 when I was sort of thinking about that relationship. It had been 2-3 years, whatever. It's, Canada wasn't the size that I wanted or expected. And I said, but why do these guys even really exist? Not because I was trying to cut them out of anything. I was just like, we're kind of stagnant. It's nothing too exciting. And I was thinking about, ironically, like, I'll just fully take it on myself. Like I'm doing it anyway, right? And then all of a sudden I get an unsolicited term sheet to buy me from my Canadian distributor. I'm like, what? This is fucking weird. And it was unsolicited. He had no idea what my numbers were or anything like that. And that was in the latter half of the summer of 2017. And we ultimately ended up agreeing on and executing a term sheet around Thanksgiving of 2017. And the transaction closed in May of 2018. But the story of how we got there and the structuring and the creativity is pretty fucking awesome. It's pretty cool.
And that is what we're covering next time. I love it, man. This is so fun. This has been so much fun, man. And I'm looking forward to talking more in depth about that story, because and the reason that I appreciated you being open to the 2-part is because so many times in 1 hour we're trying to cover the whole growth and exit, and like not enough times do we get into the why are we doing this, and then how do we operationally scale, and then why do we exit? And it takes a while to uncover that. So super awesome, David. Before we wrap up, I'll give you the same 2 questions I ask everybody. One is where to find you, and the second is, what does the word intentional mean to you?
What does intentional mean to me? I guess it's about doing things on purpose, doing things, I guess on purpose, right? Like
I love it, man. That's enough said. Drop the mic. It's
you don't know.
No, it's awesome, man. And it's interesting how many times now since we rebranded the show about 2 years ago, the amount of times people say the word on purpose, and it's very interesting. I think it's one of my.
What's your definition? Give me the answer. What's your definition of intentional?
It's having a clear vision of what you want, and then doing things every day on purpose to make progress towards what you want.
But how hard is that, right? I mean, I guess that's for part 2, but like, how hard is that, Brian? Like that, I don't know what the fuck I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I don't know what I want.
I love it. Well, and that's what's interesting is, and we'll definitely dive into that too, because I think it's amazing how many people don't know what they want. And so the book that actually sent me on this entire journey after we sold was Finish Big by Bo Burlingham. And so he interviewed like 300 business owners, and he found out that like 75% of them were freaking miserable after they sold, regardless of how much money. And he boiled it all down in the book after all the interviews and all the research, that the people that were happy know who they were, what they wanted from their business, and why. And which is just very introspective. And they just really did a lot of work understanding who they are, what they wanted, and why, and how the business was the vehicle to help them self-actualize or create essentially the things that they wanted. And then, every day it's different, right? You're going to get the shit kicked out of you somehow. But no, my totally from my perspective is that my vision is what, like you said, keeps me going every day to deal with the punches. And then you got to course correct along the way. But it's ideally the actions every day are on purpose to make you progress towards something, not just a hamster wheel, I guess.
We could do like an open. I'll either lay down on my couch back here, or I can go to your couch and lay down on my couch, and we'll just do like a nice little therapy session.
Right,
and
David, what do you want, man? What do you want?
Yeah. You can help me find out what I want to be when I grow up. That'd be super helpful.
Oh man, this has been so enjoyable. Thank you so much for coming on, and we'll be tuning in for part 2.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. Looking forward to it.